Hello everyone, my name's Joel Ingram. I'm an English teacher here at Prior and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the English Literature course. There are three of us that teach on the English Literature course here at Prior. There's myself, Joel. I teach English Literature and English Language separately. There's Denise, who also teaches English Literature and she teaches the combined Language and Literature course as well. And there's Kerry, who teaches the English Literature and the Langlet combined and is also one of our deputy faculty managers. So you're being with one of the three of us when you come and study English Literature here at Prior. A little bit about the course. We are going to be studying AQA for our A-level English Lit. And on this, there are two exams that you'll be looking at. The first exam is looking at tragedy as a genre. And for that, we'll be studying a range of different texts and having a look at what makes a text a tragedy. We'll look at a bit of Shakespearean tragedy, which I'm sure you're familiar with your studies of Shakespeare at school. We'll be looking at a play called Othello for that and exploring how Shakespeare uses the tragic conventions in that particular play. We'll also be looking at some more modern texts as well as we go through looking at tragedy. We'll be looking at some poetry by John Keats. You may be familiar with some of his poetry from studying those at school as well. And we'll be looking at a modern play called Death of a Salesman. So you'll get to look at a whole different range of different kinds of tragic texts and have a think about what makes these stories tragedies and how they fit in that overall genre. And that's on your first exam. Your second exam, for that one, we'll be studying crime fiction. Now, I'm sure lots of you are already fans of looking at crime fiction, whether it's through the stories that you've read or the films that you've watched or the TV series that you enjoy. And we'll be looking at all about what makes a crime story the way that it is. How does it fit into that genre of crime writing? And for that, we'll be looking at some of the classics. We'll be looking at examples of Agatha Christie, looking at her characters, her detectives with Poirot, etc. We'll be looking at some Sherlock Holmes style stories and looking at those kind of classic conventions of what makes a crime story, the detective, the victims, the murder mystery, and all the things that go alongside that. Alongside looking at some of those classic examples, we'll also be studying some more modern examples, looking at some poems that look at crime as well. So for your exam, we'll be studying one Agatha Christie text, which will be the Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And for that text, you're looking at the real classic conventions. We'll also look at a more modern novel by a novelist called Kate Atkinson, called When Will There Be Good News? And what she's doing there is taking a very different take on the crime genre and starting to explore a different kind of detective and a different kind of murder mystery story, and not necessarily following the conventions that you will have seen with the likes of Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie 100 years ago. So we're looking at how a modern take works on that. We'll also look at some poetry that explores crime fiction, looking at some Oscar Wilde, some Robert Browning, and looking at how the different narrative style of poetry can explore some of the similar conventions. We'll also be asking you to read lots and lots of crime fiction because in your exam you'll be asked to write about a piece of crime fiction you haven't seen before. So in order to do that, you need to be able to comment on how it fits in with the other crime texts that you've read. And that's your two exams. You're also lucky enough for A-level literature to do some coursework. And for the coursework, what we start to do is look at some critical approaches. So we're looking at different ways you can read fiction, different ways you can read stories, different ways you can read all kinds of literature. So for that, we will look at things like how do Marxists look at literature? So they're looking at money and power and status and how that has an impact on stories. We'll look at feminist approaches to literature. We'll look at eco-critical approaches to literature. We'll look at some things about the value of literature. What makes a great text a great text? Why do we study the text that we do? And we'll look at all those different approaches and different ideas, and then we'll give you a little bit of independence to have a think about which text you'd like to apply that to. And at that point, that's where all of you who love reading can get to choose some of those texts that you've enjoyed reading over the 2 years that you're here, and before and outside of that as well. And you can start to think about two of those approaches that we've studied, how you'd like to apply them to some texts of your choice. So you get some real independence there, and we'll really encourage you to choose texts with your own interests in mind and texts that you will particularly enjoy. And that's what you'll do for your coursework. So you get the kind of classical tragedy up to some kind of different takes on tragedy, classic crime fiction with some more modern interpretations of that as well, and then some real independence and freedom when it comes to the coursework. And that's what you'll be studying, and that's where you'll get your exams as we work forward towards your A-level in English Literature. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.